Hello, my name is Graham Moss. I'm the Principal Building Surveyor for the Australian Building Codes Board. This video is a brief update on NCC 2022 Ancillary Provisions Section G. The first change to cover today is G1D4, what's known in 2019 as G1.3, and that's outdoor play spaces for early childhood centres. Now, it's always been the case that the outdoor play space needs a 1926.1 compliant pool fence, that is 1926.1, the reference standard for pool fencing. So for this reason, the fence that is at the edge of an outdoor play space will need to be at least 1.2 metres tall. This year we've added 1, B and C, as shown by the orange line on this slide, for where there is a fall of 2 metres or more. Now, this fall could be because of the retaining wall, for instance, or for other landscaping. However, this provision was developed to cover outdoor play spaces that are found on balconies or on rooftop spaces. So if you have a 2 metre fall, the fence needs to be at least 1.8 metres tall to meet these requirements. Next I want to cover is Part G5, Construction in Bushfire-Prone Areas. There's been some significant changes this year because under NCC 2019 in the national provisions, the only buildings that Volume 1 requires to meet bushfire requirements are a Class 2 or 3 building or an associated Class 10A like a deck or a bin store. For NCC 2022, we have a new section for the Class 9 buildings that you see listed here. They're hospitals, early childhood centres, primary and secondary schools, and residential care buildings such as aged care buildings. Now note, this isn't every type of Class 9 building. For example, you don't see a sports stadium listed here. These particular building types are ones where the occupants are vulnerable, and therefore it's appropriate to provide extra provisions to protect them in a bushfire event. I'll take you to those extra provisions shortly, but the first thing to note is that these deemed to satisfy provisions for these special Class 9 buildings apply only to BAL 12.5. Now, you're probably aware of the AS3959 bushfire attack level, the BAL rating system. That's a risk rating system which is based on the likelihood of exposure to bushfire attack. These DTS provisions for certain Class 9 buildings run out at BAL 12.5. If you go up to BAL 19 or above, you need to do a performance solution. However, up to bushfire-prone land, up to BAL 12.5, are covered by these deemed to satisfy provisions. If you're familiar with the current bushfire provisions for Class 2 and 3 buildings, you'd be aware that for these particular buildings, we refer you to AS3959 for construction requirements. Now, for these special Class 9 buildings, it's different. We don't refer you to AS3959. Instead, we send you to Specification 43, which contains the construction requirements for these special buildings. Now, these construction requirements do exceed those that are found in AS3959. I'll step you through those right now. First provision to show you is Clause 2 in Specification 43, separation from classified vegetation. Now, this is quite similar to requirements found in AS3959. What we're requiring is a minimum distance from vegetation that's specified, and that's a concept straight from AS3959. Next is Clause 3, separation between buildings. You have 3 options, and I'll explain those options using the hypothetical scenario with these 3 buildings, A, B and C. The first option is a distance of at least 12 metres between buildings, as is the case between A and B here. If you have 12 metres or more, then you meet the requirements. But buildings B and C are within 12 metres of each other, and that's where Clause 2B comes in. There are more options inside this clause that both involve envelope protection. So the first option is to provide FRL 60-60-60 walls, as shown on building B. The next option, as shown on building C, is a tested envelope system. Now, that entire envelope needs to be submitted to a test under AS 1530.8.1 for a flux of at least 10 kilowatts per square metre. Now, AS 1530.8.1 isn't a primary reference in NCC 2019. However, it is called up by AS 3959. It's the standard that's used by manufacturers and people like that to test windows, doors and other things to find out what BAL those could withstand. And of course, it can be used also to rate a wall or a roof system as an option for buildings within 12 metres of another building. So that's Clause 2, separation between buildings. We also require separation from hazards including a boundary or an open car park. That's Clause 4. Clause 5 requires protection from other hazards like a bin compound. Now, that needs to be at least 10 metres, but if you don't achieve 10 metres, you can use the same protection methods that I outlined before, an FRL 60-60-60 wall or the tested envelope system. So with 4 provisions about separation, you can see that this is an important part of the fire safety strategy for bushfire protection for these Class 9 buildings. And of course, that's not new. It's an established way of protecting buildings from the effects of bushfire. However, that's not all. We also have Clause 6, which is requiring a non-combustible path at least 1.5 metres wide around the building. So you can't have garden beds, for instance, right up against your building. Next is Clause 7, access pathways. What you'll find in this provision are additional requirements beyond those found in D1.10 for exit pathways from buildings. Clause 9 is important to note. There needs to be internal tenability maintained for the duration of the bushfire. And so Clause 9 contains special requirements in order to ensure that that internal tenability is met. Clause 10, building envelope. You have to build the walls and roof to AS3959 as if your building is in a BAL 19 zone, even though it's only up to 12.5, for which these provisions apply. There's also water supply requirements. Even if your building doesn't need a fire hydrant, you need to at least have a water supply. That could be a pool or a dam. You'll find more details in Clause 11 of Spec 43. There's also a requirement for emergency power. Now, this power system needs to be able to run the internal tenability systems for Clause 9 and other things for a period of at least 6 hours. Signage is also required in Clause 13. There has to be a sign somewhere saying don't store combustible material near the building. And of course, finally, vehicular access has to be provided as for a large isolated building. This requirement is to ensure that the fire brigade can easily access the building and effect operations. Now, this is a very brief overview of the new Class 9 bushfire provisions. If you are working with Class 9 buildings in bushfire-prone areas, I do recommend that you have a closer look at Part G5 and Specification 43 in the production version of NCC 2022. Also new for Section G is livable housing, or you might know of this as accessible housing. This is also in Volume 2 in Part H8. What is livable housing? Well, I'll explain it this way. Currently, there are no accessibility requirements in the NCC for the internal parts of a Class 2 unit, or indeed for a Class 1A house, to be accessible. There's no requirement under NCC 2019 for these internal dwellings to be accessible, but that changes with NCC 2022. Both Volume 1 and Volume 2 refer to a new ABCB reference standard, the Livable Housing Design Standard. Now, I've talked about making these dwellings accessible, but livable housing isn't so much about making these accessible, but rather making them adaptable. This is a diagram from the standard, and under the standard you need to have a toilet on the entrance level of the dwelling. That toilet has to be next to a wall, and though the grab rail doesn't have to be installed for the final inspection, you do need to have blocking or sheeting installed so as to be able to receive a handrail in the future. So the handrail doesn't have to be there for the final inspection, but the blocking or the sheeting needs to be there. So of course, this is a way, amongst others, of how the Livable Housing Standard makes a dwelling adaptable. There are other requirements listed on this slide. We're talking about step-free entry, circulation requirements as shown by this diagram here, corridor widths of 1 metre or more, minimum doorway widths, also the requirement for a step-free shower. Now, at the time of recording of this video, the technical requirements of the Livable Housing Standard had not been finalised. So of course, we're not in a position to update you fully during this video. However, do watch our website, abcb.gov.au, because we certainly intend to support livable housing provisions when they're finalised with detailed education. So please watch this space, abcb.gov.au.